It happened on a night when no one was paying attention. The ballroom at Lexington Heights shimmered like a glass snow globe. Crystal chandeliers dripping with diamonds, laughter clinking off champagne flutes, and live jazz humming like background perfume. No one noticed the boy at first. River Dalton, 10 years old, dressed like a page out of GQ Kids. Silent. Always silent. He was the son of Colton Dalton, the tech billionaire whose face never cracked unless there was a camera on him. Tonight was his charity gala, $10,000 a plate, raising funds for an autism research center his own son refused to attend. And yet, no one saw him leave his seat. No one stopped him when he walked slowly, almost sleepwalking, to the front of the ballroom, and no one dared breathe when he picked up the child-size violin from the velvet display table near the bandstand. Except her, Layla Monroe, the waitress with coffee stains on her apron and violin strings in her heart. She saw him, felt something stir, and against every rule she'd been given, every warning from her manager, every ounce of doubt inside her, she walked up beside him. She didn't touch him, didn't speak. She simply raised her hand, open palm, a rhythm, a pulse. River turned toward her, eyes locked. For the first time in the club's history, the music stopped, not because it ended, but because something bigger had started. And then he played. 3 trembling notes, shaky, imperfect, but real. And just as the last note hung in the air, sharp as glass, a voice tore through the silence. "Who told you to touch my son?" Layla Monroe didn't plan on staying in Atlanta. She told herself it was temporary, just a detour. One of those pause moments life throws at you when you're too broke to fight back and too stubborn to surrender. She had been a music therapy student at Emory University once. Almost graduated. Almost certified. Almost something. Then her cousin Amir, the boy with the softest hums and the loudest silences, took a turn for the worse. Autism was part of their world since he was 3. But when the seizures came, when the schools gave up and the specialists threw out more prescriptions than progress, Layla did what no one else would. She dropped everything to care for him. Amir died the week before her final year began. Layla never returned to class. She couldn't. Because every time she heard music, it felt like betrayal, like hearing joy after burying it. So she took jobs that didn't ask for smiles, night shifts, busser work. And finally a spot at Lexington Heights, a place so elite it didn't call itself a country club. Just the Heights, as if naming it made it exclusive enough. The rules were clear. No personal conversations with guests. No lingering. And definitely no interacting with Colton Dalton's son. Everyone knew River. The quiet kid with expensive shoes and haunted eyes. He didn't speak, didn't gesture. He just existed, like furniture you weren't supposed to sit on. Rumor was his mother had been a cellist, world-renowned. She died in a car accident on a rainy morning 3 years ago. River was in the back seat. He survived, but he hadn't spoken a word since. Colton, once a charming founder with TED Talks and venture capital swagger, hardened overnight. He turned grief into control. Appointments, private therapies, schedules tighter than Wall Street. Nothing worked. But when Layla saw River at the gala, standing next to that violin like it called to him, she didn't see a lost cause. She saw a mirror. She saw the same tilt of the head, the same twitch of the fingers when overwhelmed, the same magnetic pull toward music. So Not as a performance, but as a way out. And she knew. She didn't need words to reach him. She just needed to be still, to listen, to raise her hand, and offer rhythm when the world only gave him noise. What happened next wasn't planned, it wasn't practiced, it wasn't allowed, but it was real. And sometimes, that's the only thing that matters. The violin string hadn't even stopped vibrating when the first whispers began. One guest gasped. Another dropped their champagne flute. Cameras weren't allowed inside the Lexington Heights ballroom, but someone still raised a phone. A flash. A click. Then came the voice. "Who told you to touch my son?" Colton Dalton stood at the edge of the dance floor, fury coiled in every word. His custom suit looked like it cost more than Layla's annual salary, but it couldn't hide the crack forming behind his eyes. Layla froze. "I didn't touch him," she said quietly. River, still gripping the violin, turned toward his father. His bow hand trembled but didn't lower. Colton stepped forward, voice cold as glass. "You were hired to serve drinks and clear plates, not to insert yourself into my family." Layla's mouth opened, but before she could speak, a thin woman in heels whispered loud enough to be heard. "This is exactly how lawsuits happen." Another voice snorted. "She's just trying to go viral? Probably called TMZ herself." Laughter rippled across a few tables, tight, cruel, the kind that stings more than it amuses. Layla looked at River, still standing there like a small statue carved out of defiance. His eyes were locked on hers, still, present, unblinking, but the spell was broken. Colton moved in, gently took the violin from River, and set it back on the velvet display like it was a bomb. He knelt beside his son. "Let's go." But River didn't move. Instead, he reached for Layla. Not a hug, not a touch, just a gesture, a mirrored motion, open palm, the rhythm she'd taught him in silence. Layla's heart cracked in two. That's when the manager arrived, red-faced and stiff-backed. "Miss Monroe, you need to come with me, now." They pulled her from the ballroom like she was dangerous, like she'd contaminated the space, down the back corridor, past the kitchens, through the staff hallway lined with faded motivational posters. In the manager's office, they didn't yell. That was almost worse. "This is a high-profile venue, Layla, you know that." "I didn't do anything wrong," she said. "You deviated from protocol. That's enough." She stared at the clock behind his head. 11:12 p.m., the exact moment her life bent in a new direction. "We're suspending you while we review the incident, the manager added, scribbling something into a thick binder. "No pay until further notice." Layla left the building through the side door. No goodbyes, no closure, just cold air and silence. She pulled her coat tighter as she walked down Peachtree Street toward the MARTA station, her shoes soaking in the leftover puddles from an earlier storm. By the time she reached the subway platform, her hands were shaking. She thought of Amir. She thought of River. And just before the train arrived, she opened her phone. One new notification. A message request. No name. Just a single image. River's drawing. A violin. A woman. The word Layla scribbled in big block letters. She bit her lip, holding back the sob. Not from shame. Not from fear. But from the aching weight of being the only person in that entire ballroom who listened and paying the price for it. Layla didn't return to the Heights. Not right away. She spent the next 3 days in her tiny apartment above the laundromat on Collier Street, watching steam rise from old radiators and wondering if silence always felt this loud. Her phone buzzed a few times. A couple of co-workers messaged to say, "Hope you're okay," followed by emojis that meant nothing. One manager texted, "We'll let you know after the board meets." But none of them mattered. She kept replaying that moment. River. The way he looked at her. The way he mirrored her hand. No script, no instructions, just trust. He reached her in a way Amir used to. Without words, without expectation, just music, waiting to be heard. So on the fourth day, she walked. Not toward the club, but toward a small rooftop garden 2 blocks away. A place she'd found once when escaping a catering shift, where the city seemed to breathe a little softer. She brought her old violin. It hadn't been played in years. The strings were dull, the bow was frayed. But when she pressed it to her chin and closed her eyes, the notes came out like breath on a cold morning. Broken, shaky, but alive. She played for herself, until she heard footsteps. Software hesitant, sneakers on gravel. She turned. River. Alone. No bodyguards, no nannies, no father. Just him, in his little jacket with the hood pulled tight, holding something in his hands. Her coffee order. She blinked. "How did you—" He didn't answer, of course. But he set the cup down beside her, then sat cross-legged on the cement, watching. Layla raised her bow again, heart pounding. And this time, she played something gentle, slower. A melody Amir used to hum when words were too hard. River didn't blink. Instead, he leaned forward and, without touching, lifted his right hand and mimicked her motion. Bow in the air, fingers in the air. A duet with no sound, no sheet music, no audience, just 2 people reclaiming the language that had been stolen from them. They met again the next day, and the next. Always in the garden, always without speaking. She brought her violin. He brought a pencil and his notebook. And each time, something changed. One day, he played a note. Just one. Sharp. A little too flat. But it was his. The next day, he played 2. Then 4. Until finally, on a Thursday morning with sunlight pouring through the vines, he played an entire phrase. 6 notes. Layla recognized it instantly. It was the unfinished lullaby from the gala. The same tune he had hesitantly started in front of the ballroom. But this time, he finished it. And when he looked up, his eyes weren't asking for approval. They were asking if she heard it too. She did. They sat there silent and still, until the door behind them creaked. Layla turned and saw Colton Dalton, standing at the edge of the rooftop, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. He didn't speak, didn't shout. He simply watched, the same way a man watches a memory come back to life. Colton didn't speak. He stood just inside the rooftop entrance, the door clicking shut behind him with a hollow echo. The kind that makes people turn, freeze. But River didn't. He was still playing, still lost in the fragile 6-note melody that barely held its shape. Like a dream remembered just before waking. Layla sat frozen, bow suspended mid-air, unsure whether to stop or keep going. Colton took 2 steps closer, but not toward them. He moved toward the bench in the far corner of the rooftop. The one no one ever sat on. Slowly, cautiously, as if approaching something sacred. He didn't sit. He just stared at River. When the final note hung in the air, Colton whispered almost involuntarily, "That song. Where did you hear that?" River said nothing. Of course he didn't. He simply lowered the violin and looked at Layla, as if to ask, "Was that okay?" Layla swallowed hard. He's been playing bits of it all week, just building toward it. Colton's voice was quieter now. But that melody, that wasn't from the gala, was it? No, Layla said. He's never heard it anywhere public? Exactly, Colton said, his brow furrowed, the crack in his armor beginning to split. That melody, that was Caroline's. Layla blinked. Your wife? He nodded. She composed that lullaby. Never recorded it, never published it, only played it for River late at night, when she thought no one was listening. He ran a hand over his face. I used to tease her, said she should release it, said she was sitting on a masterpiece, but she always said, this one's not for the world. It's just for him. His voice broke on that last word. Him. He looked down at River, whose eyes were now scanning Colton's face like he was searching for something. Recognition, permission, or maybe just peace. I thought he forgot, Colton whispered. After she passed, he stopped everything. Stopped eating. Stopped drawing. Stopped talking. I thought the music died with her. Layla didn't respond. She knew better than to fill silence that meant something. But Colton turned to her, jaw clenched. How did you get him to remember? I didn't, Layla said, gently setting her violin on her lap. He remembered on his own. I just gave him space, and someone to remember with. Colton's eyes flicked back to River. He hasn't looked at me like that in years. Maybe because you've been trying to fix him, Layla said carefully. When all he wanted was someone who wouldn't try to change him. Colton didn't flinch, but his silence said everything. Do you know what every therapist told me? He said finally. Structure, routine, boundaries. They gave me charts, graphs, behavior models. None of them said maybe he just needs someone to sit next to him and wait. Layla smiled, barely. That's all I did. River stood up then, walked to the edge of the rooftop where the breeze was softest. He looked over the skyline, eyes calm. Then, without turning around, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. He walked it back and handed it, not to Layla, but to Colton. The billionaire's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a hand-drawn sketch, a violin, a woman, and a faint outline of musical notes floating upward like fireflies. At the bottom, in River's crooked handwriting, were two words, Mom's Song. Colton closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, the man who built empires let himself break. Tears didn't fall like a flood. They escaped like prisoners, slow, quiet, long overdue. Layla looked away, giving him that dignity. But River didn't. He stepped forward, pressed his forehead gently against his father's sleeve, and stayed there. No words, no scripts, just presence. Colton placed one hand lightly on River's head, then turned to Layla. I don't know what this is, he said, but I know it's real, and I know I don't want it to stop. He looked around the rooftop like it had turned into something holy. Do you think he'd come back here again? If you were here? Layla didn't answer right away. She just nodded and whispered, if he leads, I'll follow. It didn't take long, 3 days, to be exact. That's how long it took for word of the rooftop moment to leak beyond the walls of Lexington Heights. It started small, a whisper among staff, a story shared between club regulars. Then someone uploaded a grainy photo to a private social board. The image showed River with the violin under his chin, sunlight behind him, Layla just out of focus, hand raised midair like a silent conductor. By the end of the week, the story had legs. By Monday, it had wings. A well-known blogger in the neurodiversity space picked it up. Billionaire's nonverbal son plays his late mother's song, with help from a waitress. Then came the interviews requests. TV producers, foundations, documentary filmmakers. Everyone wanted a piece of the miracle. But River? He just wanted the garden. Colton called a closed-door meeting with his board of directors. Layla wasn't invited, but she heard whispers from the kitchen staff. Words like public relations gold, brand humanization, and media rollout. The next day, Colton approached her carefully in the hallway near the music lounge. "You and River, you've become something I never expected," he said. "I want to protect that." Layla nodded, but something in his eyes made her pause. "But," he sighed, "some of my people, they think this story could do more, that if we shared it the right way, we could launch a program, raise awareness, raise funds." Layla didn't smile. Instead, she looked down the hallway toward the room where River had begun composing again, his own little world of paper scraps and bow strokes. "You mean make him the face of something?" she said. "I mean," Colton tried again, "maybe his healing could help others." Layla stepped closer. "Did you ask him?" Colton hesitated. "That's what I thought." The next day, a PR strategist named Mallory Crane showed up. Designer heels, silver tablet, a voice like glass and caffeine. She cornered Layla by the staff elevator and smiled with corporate warmth. "We just want to help tell the story," she said. "It's inspirational, authentic. And if you're willing to sign off on just a few appearances..." Layla cut her off. "Let me stop you right there." Mallory blinked. "You're looking at this boy like he's a campaign, a slot to fill, a brand boost. But he's a kid, a grieving one. And if you try to spin that into something shiny and clickable, you'll lose what made it special in the first place." Mallory's smile didn't change, but she left with fewer words. That evening, Layla found River in the garden again. He had brought his sketchbook and drawn something new. A violin, yes, but also a wall. And behind the wall, a crowd with cameras for faces. He handed it to her without looking up. Her heart cracked. She sat beside him. "I promise you," she said softly, "no one's getting past that wall unless you open the door." River nodded slowly. The next day, Colton surprised her. "I told the board no," he said. Layla raised an eyebrow. "I told them we're not marketing his grief," he added. "We're not monetizing his healing, not unless it's his idea, not unless it's his voice." For the first time, Layla saw it. Not just the father, but the man his son needed him to become. And then he handed her a letter. "From the Dalton Foundation," he said. "We'd like to fund something. Quietly. A music room. Here. For other kids like River. You'd run it. If you're willing..." Layla stared at him. "For real?" "For real." She looked toward the music lounge where River was humming to himself, eyes closed, bow dancing in the air. Then she smiled. "If he leads, I'll follow." The music room didn't have a name, not officially. It was just Room 6B on the blueprint, tucked beside the garden terrace, where sun poured through arched windows and the sound of birdsong filtered in like background harmony. But among the staff and a handful of parents who quietly began bringing their children, it had a different name. River's Room. It wasn't just because of the boy who helped create it. It was because of what he brought to it. Something that didn't exist on any checklist or brochure. Stillness. Permission. Space. Layla kept it simple. No schedules, no performances, just music. if they wanted it. And if they didn't, that was okay too. Some kids tapped on drums. Some just sat on pillows and listened. Some never said a word, but hummed like they had stories stitched inside them. And River? He came every day. Sometimes he played, sometimes he drew, sometimes he sat cross-legged in the corner watching others like a quiet little guardian. But one afternoon in late spring, something shifted. He walked to the front of the room, violin in hand, and waited until everyone settled. Then he turned to Layla and whispered, "Yes," whispered. "You ready?" Layla's eyes widened. He had never spoken a full sentence to her. Not once. She blinked hard and nodded. "Yeah, I'm ready." He lifted the bow, closed his eyes, and began. What came out wasn't just music. It was memory. Fragments of his mother's lullaby folded into his own variations, delicate and daring, like someone learning to speak and sing at the same time. Each note felt intentional. Every pause was a sentence. Every crescendo was a declaration. I am here, and I have something to say. When he finished, he didn't bow. He just looked at Layla and smiled. And the room? It didn't erupt in applause. It exhaled. Later, while packing up, Layla found a folded note tucked inside her violin case. River's handwriting, still uneven, still charming, it said, "Thanks for not trying to fix me. Thanks for listening first. This song is for you." That night, she sat on the rooftop, staring at the city lights and thinking of Amir, her cousin, who never got the chance to speak like this. And then she smiled, because maybe, just maybe, he had spoken. Through River, through the silence, through the music that didn't ask for permission. We live in a world obsessed with speaking louder, getting noticed, pushing for more. But sometimes, the most powerful act isn't speaking. It's listening. Listening without judgment, without a plan, without needing to change what we don't understand. River didn't need to be fixed. He needed space. He needed stillness. He needed someone willing to hear the music beneath the silence. And maybe the next time we meet someone quiet, we won't ask them to speak louder. We'll ask ourselves to listen better. Have you ever met someone who spoke volumes without saying a word? What did they teach you? About patience, about connection, or maybe even about yourself? Share your story in the comments, hit like if this moved you, and follow for more true stories that remind us to listen deeper.